From the underground bunker of the Civitas studio in Raleigh, North Carolina, it's Civitalk with your hosts Brooke Medina and Ray Nothstine. We're here to connect culture with civics, making it relevant to your daily life. And dare we say, existence at a time where too many are triggered and offended. So, relax, but buckle up and let's wade into the deep end. What's really happening in your old North state?
Welcome to another edition of Civitalk. We have a guest co-host today here, our policy advisor and policy analyst, Leah Byers. We're going to be talking about the filing deadline here in North Carolina, the 2020 campaign, presidential campaign. Always interesting, a lot going on here in North Carolina with that. Silent Sam and teacher testing. So we've got a lot of fun topics, but first of all, we're going to kick it off talking about Christmas shopping, because I know a lot of the listeners out there are shopping right now. Leah, I don't know what you've been up to, but I try to avoid the stores now at all costs, any sort of big box store, because I can remember a couple years ago getting some shopping done late and just going out there and being in like insane traffic and insane lines. So I try to just do it online now.
Yeah, and they had a lot of big Cyber Monday deals this week, so starting to see those packages roll in, and I think that's the way to go these days.
Yeah, I don't know. It used to be Black Friday used to be a bigger thing, but it's certainly dropped off the map. Usually Drudge Report, and they had a little bit of this. They would like highlight some of the big fights, whether it was people throwing stuff at each other or begin like, massive fights in the stores over basically products that are just made in China or any sort of like just whether it be toys or gimmicky type products. It's just kind of funny to me, see people actually fist fighting over things like that. But you didn't see as much of that this year as you saw in years past.
Yeah, I think so much of it is that because of Cyber Monday and shopping online, the stores aren't offering the deals that they used to offer on Black Friday. And I'm an avid Black Friday shopper. I go every single year.
Oh, really?
I love the experience, love getting the doorbusters. But I went on Black Friday and bought a lot of stuff, and then they had better deals on Cyber Monday. So I was missing out or placing online orders after I'd already bought stuff. So, yeah, I love the experience, but Cyber Monday might be the way to go.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't like going out shopping anyway, so if I can avoid that. And my wife sent me a list of stuff that she wants, and so it makes it easy for me. And, I just have a hard time shopping for people, so I'm not.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think that's part of adulting that I'm realizing is like you get to choose what you get for Christmas. Like my mom just gave me her credit card and said, order what your brother wants, order what you want on Amazon. I mean, she knew what it was, and she obviously had some price limits. It wasn't a free-for-all, but she had me do her Christmas shopping for myself and my brother on Cyber Monday.
That's not bad. I wouldn't mind that. I mean, you kind of just get exactly what you wanted, and you don't have to worry about a size being wrong or something else to that degree. So I wouldn't mind that. I mean, I like having surprises every once in a while. My wife is a really good shopper, and I know a lot of folks out there are just really smart shoppers, but I don't know if I'm one of those. Yeah. I know what I want for myself, but for other people, I sometimes struggle in deciding what they want.
Yeah, I have that same problem. My mom always tells me, just get them what you think they'll like, and then the rest is up to them, because I tend to obsess over, I can't get them this, they won't like it, they already have one, etc. But at the end of the day, I think it really is the thought that counts, as cheesy as that is.
Not that they're providing us any money or checks, but what kind of stores or brands do you like that might be recognizable to people? I mean, if you're out there shopping, what kind of like maybe companies or names you kind of trust or like out there in the marketplace?
For Christmas shopping, or
just maybe in general. I mean, just for general products out there that people might utilize, whether it be something technology related, clothing, or whether it's something even bigger like a vehicle or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I got a lot of my good deals this Cyber Week on makeup websites. Mm-hmm. So I kind of stocked up for the year, buy a couple things, and then you don't have to shop throughout the year. That was my rationale, at least, for placing those big orders. So I was most proud of that. I got a deal from Banana Republic on some new shoes for work. So tried to keep it to things that are practical, and I'd like to tell myself I would buy anyway. So then I'm just buying them now because they're on sale and it's a better deal.
My wife wanted some stuff from Talbot, so I wasn't too familiar with that. But she wanted some clothing from there, and,
I think
and
that
shoes
is a good
and
brand.
stuff. Mm-hmm. And I do have a Banana Republic story, Leah.
Okay.
And I think it was in South Alabama. I'm trying to think of the big outlet mall down there. It's in Foley, Alabama, though. And I remember going into a Banana Republic, and the young girl tried to sell me man-prees. So
man capris.
Yeah, exactly, man capris. And I just remember looking at her like she was crazy, and like, do I look like? Because I think I had like cowboy boots on or something. I was like, do I look like someone that would wear man capris? But she was kind of insisting that they were really in fashion. And I remember going back to a Banana Republic. I think it was like a year later in Washington D.C. And I go, do you have any of those like man capris for guys? And they're like, oh, I just remember like they were totally offended. Like we don't sell those. But I was like, you guys had them last year, but they totally denied it.
If you were at the outlet store, maybe that's why they were
perhaps
at the
that's a good point. Yeah, maybe that's why they were at the outlet. Yeah. So, anyways, let's move on, and let's shift. Let's talk about Silent Sam first, if you're okay with that, Leah. I mean, that's a big issue here in North Carolina, obviously, which is the Confederate monuments in general. I mean, they are coming under attack, even in counties that are a little bit more conservative, or you wouldn't think where it'd be such a huge issue. I know there's been some headlines in Winston-Salem. I don't remember the exact monument, but in other parts of the state, Asheboro has been in the news for that. I don't remember all the particulars, but here, of course, with UNC Chapel Hill, Carolina, Silent Sam was removed by protesters forcibly against the law, toppled down, and then, of course, the president wanted to get rid of Silent Sam for good. And so there's been a deal cut, $2.5 million payment to the North Carolina chapter of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And this is creating a lot of consternation and outrage among students and activists and protesters who are just appalled, even though they got their way essentially by tearing this monument down. Now they're appalled that there would be a $2.5 million transfer of funds to the Southern Confederate Veterans to take care of the statue, to do with what they will. To me, it seems like a cheap bargain in a way to get rid of this problem, which, at least from an administrative standpoint, the UNC Chapel Hill has not done a good job of kind of handling.
Yeah, I agree with that. And our listeners might be interested. Maybe they saw this back when we did it, but we did a poll when Silent Sam was removed by the protesters. And we asked North Carolinians, do you think we should remove Confederate statues or monuments? And I think it was pretty split. The results were split. But then we asked them, do you think that it should be forcibly removed by protesters or a mob? And it was
overwhelmingly,
people opposed that. And so the mob rule mentality, it's nice to have these conversations, or maybe it's the time to have those apparently, but to kind of bow to the will of the mob, especially at UNC Chapel Hill, is just has a bad taste in most people's mouths, I would say.
Yeah, just bowing to the rule of the mob is never a good idea, and that's going to create a lot of unintended consequences and just erosion of liberty down the road. I have a hard time, Leah, with the sort of tearing down of these monuments, or even just sort of removing them. I mean, if it's done through a legal process, then certainly, if those are the elected representatives and that's what they decide to do, then that's fine. But to me, I mean, it's almost, I still view it as kind of this denial of history to some degree, because look, I mean, North Carolina was part of the Confederacy, seceded from the Union, and there were a lot of people in this state that died, and a lot of people that died in this state, they weren't slave owners, obviously. And I think it's okay to recognize, not praising sort of the political views of the Confederacy, of course, and the pro-slavery views of the Confederacy, but I think it's okay to recognize that people from your state went off and fought in a war and died. And to me, I get that some of the monuments might be, I totally understand this. I mean, I went to Ole Miss where this was such a big issue. I get that they could be perceived as, having some sort of racial animosity behind them, certainly with the Confederacy. Totally get that. But I do think there's this element, especially with something like Silent Sam, which was kind of representing a common soldier, not so much this whole notion of slavery, so to speak. But I do think you sort of lose this sense of, I think, just recognizing something from history to some degree. I don't know if you agree with that, disagree with that, but to me, just sort of tearing down monuments will always have a kind of Khmer Rouge appeal to it. And what I mean by Khmer Rouge, I mean, when they took over in Cambodia, they were a Marxist group. They tried to go back to the year zero, and they started to tear down any sort of monuments or things that, happened in the history that they did not agree with. And so, to me, it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth, because I think it's okay to kind of highlight bad things in history. And by tearing this down, I think sort of this erasing culture, erasure culture is not going to end well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, are we so fragile now that we can't be reminded of anything in our past as a culture that is, harmful? And obviously, I'm from the South. I think everyone who hears my voice can probably tell that. And actually, my family has been in Western North Carolina for generations, and we have a Civil War sword actually in our family that's been passed down. I think it's maybe a great grandfather or whatnot that was in the Civil War, fought for the Confederacy, and we have his sword to this day. And it is part of our history. And like you said, we don't want to celebrate the negative parts. We want to be able to learn from those. But I think it's okay and important to talk about history with the nuance that is there. And so I'm fine, as you said, with moving those kind of statues if it's done under a due process with representatives or officials deciding that and making the conscious choice to move it. I don't have a problem with that, but the way that this went about and how it kind of feels like we're bowing to the mob, and even when we do, it's not enough for them. Just the existence of the statue is hurting them in some way, and it's like you have to be able to acknowledge where we come from, I think, in order to know where we're going to go. And I think, as you said, it's not all bad in our past, and just because you're Southern and maybe your ancestors fought for the Confederacy, it doesn't have certain implications about who you are as a person or how you feel or even how they felt. Within these larger systems, people have nuance and people have their own personal convictions, and you have to consider that on a case-by-case basis.
That's absolutely right. I always appreciate Andrew Young. Some of you may not know him. Some of you will. He was a former mayor of Atlanta. He's a former congressman from Georgia, basically representing Atlanta. He was a civil rights leader. He was one of the chief lieutenants to Martin Luther King Jr. In this SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, I believe was the acronym. But he kind of said that this is really a non-issue. I mean, he said that there are more pervasive issues within the black community. And even in our polling, Leah, you didn't see sort of this, it's not necessarily everybody who's black thinks one way, obviously, or everybody who's white thinks. There's a lot of breakup, and there's a lot of breakup on the generational side. It tended to me that older African-American, older blacks in North Carolina were less offended by this. They didn't see it as problematic. And I do think that there could be a little bit of a generational divide there. I mean, this is sort of it's a young person. You see these sort of rallies at Chapel Hill or other places. It's actually predominantly more white.
Yes.
And it's younger. It's obviously younger. And there's certainly different, there's at least a diverse ethnic makeup, but it's certainly heavily white when you look at some of these protests. I mean, I remember looking at some of the protests in Durham when they toppled the other monument, and it was in some areas very predominantly white. And so, yeah, I mean, it is a complex issue, but it to me, I mean, ultimately, just sort of the idea of tearing down Confederate monuments. And look, I've lived in the South. There were a lot of formative years in my life in the South, but all my ancestors fought for the Union. They were in they fought with Sherman, and some of them fought at Gettysburg, and some of them fought at Lookout Mountain. They all fought for the Union, but I had many predominant years growing up in the American South. And so to me, kind of looking at these monuments, I don't find them offensive. I don't find them in any way sort of like, antagonizing. It's just a part of the history. And I think you recognize that people went off and died and fought in a war. And I think there's value in that and not forgetting that. So I think, people making it out to be more than it is, to me, is also problematic. So, it's something we'll continue to watch here in North Carolina. It's going to be an issue all throughout the American South. And you see kind of expanded. I mean, you've seen other monuments come into question in other parts of the country, whether it be something that has to do with the American Revolution. I think you will see more of that. I mean, so it's just something to watch. And, I hope North Carolina always, my hope and goal for this state is that people come together and people kind of have one sound mind on a lot of issues. I know that's impossible, but it'd be nice to see kind of on issues like this that I think are just really more historical than anything, that you can see some kind of unification and not sort of focusing on an issue that I think is really more at the periphery of the state. So let's move on. Let's talk about the filing deadline, because we've got a lot of candidates who have already filed to run for office. Is there any surprises, Leah? What do you kind of take away from this?
I wouldn't say that I've had any surprises so far, but filing is young still. It started on December 2nd and it closes on the 20th. So anything can happen. A lot of the usual suspects or the people that we've known have been campaigning for a while have filed. In terms of surprises, I think one thing is we are seeing that in the Charlotte area, a lot of the state legislators that are Republicans that lost their seat in the 2018 election have refiled to run against the people that beat them in 2018. So there'll be a lot of rematches in that regard. And so that should make things interesting, especially because in Charlotte in particular, there was a lot of money spent in 2018 to flip some of those seats. And even with the amount of money that was spent, in one case with former Representative Bill Brawley and current Representative Rachel Hunt, she outspent him, 3 or 4 times, I believe, and only won by 61 votes.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I mean, those are it's tiny return on investment when it comes to the amount of money that was spent. And obviously 2020 is going to be a very important year because we have the presidential election, the gubernatorial election, and a U.S. Senate election. So are people going to be able to funnel as much money into these state legislative races? Maybe not, or you could make the argument maybe it's going to be even more important because Democrats think now that they've broken the Republican supermajority, they can take back the majorities.
Yeah, I think North Carolina's obviously going to get a lot of focus just because of we are more of a swing state now than Ohio and Florida, at least at the presidential level. So you're going to see just a lot of investment, I think, in the state in terms of both sides. Certainly Democrats don't want to cede any ground that they've captured here in North Carolina, and their intent. I mean, when they look at the state, they look at this as a state that they feel like they should own. They don't want to give it up. They had a lock on this state for a very long time. So it's kind of interesting to see. And of course, I know most of our listeners already know this, but Garland Tucker has dropped out in the U.S. Senate primary against Tom Tillis. So he, to my knowledge at least, I don't think he's running opposed. I don't know if there's a minor candidate still in there. But Garland Tucker has withdrawn from the race, basically citing fundraising reasons and that the impeachment stuff has really propped Tillis up to some degree here in North Carolina. I mean, I remember doing radio in the eastern part of the state, Leah, and I just thought, Tillis may have a tough time winning a primary because people were getting on the phone, they were taking callers, and they were yelling at Tillis. They were mad. So it's interesting to see how this will shake up for the general election if some of that stuff that's kind of pervaded against him on popularity will play a huge role, or if he just kind of coasts to re-election. Because sometimes these Senate races, they'll make a prediction that someone's going to lose, and then they win easily. They're hard to predict oftentimes, and sometimes you'll see some pretty dramatic upsets that were unexpected. So
yeah, I think Tillis was lucky that some of his more controversial moves amongst his Republican base happened so far in advance of the election. I mean, we're still. The primary is in March, so it's about 3 months from now. But some of his blunders, you would say, if you're the Republican base, were several months ago now. And so that's kind of lost steam. And as you said, Garland Tucker dropped out of the race. I think there is another lesser known person in the race. You could make the case that if a big name Republican had challenged Tillis, that maybe they would have had a better chance.
Yeah, some people said Mark Walker or someone like that.
Right, and that still could happen. As I said, filing is still going on, so we'll see what happens with that. But I think one thing is Tillis has said, if I win re-election this time, I'm not going to run again after that. So some of them might not want to make that political enemy and divide the party if they think I can just run for his seat in the next term, or I can run for the open Richard Burr seat in 2022 when we have another U.S. Senate race. So I think they just don't want to burn the bridges within the party, and I can kind of see the rationale for that.
Yeah, and Trump just sucks kind of all the oxygen out of sort of some of the stuff going on in state politics, or even the focus on Tillis. I think Trump just kind of sucked a lot of that air out of the room, which was favorable for Tillis.
Yeah, I think so. And we've seen so far 15, and I think this is the final number, will be 15 Democratic candidates for president on the ballot in North Carolina. So I think there are a few more running that didn't make the cut. That's my understanding, but 15 that the Democratic primary voters will have to choose from, and so that includes registered Democrats or unaffiliated who want to vote in that primary. Right now, Donald Trump is the only Republican that's registered. I believe he will be the only Republican registered. There is an option for them to add some more people, but we'll see. But so you have a lot of the unaffiliateds that come out, or most of them, if not all of them, are going to be voting on that Democratic primary ticket, and so that should be if they're just going to vote for president. Now, if they're going to vote for other things, they would have to get the Republican ticket, obviously.
Let's just real quickly, because I know Brooke and I talked a little bit about this last week, but Politico has, and obviously we have our polling at Civitas that has showed Cooper with the steady lead in the gubernatorial race. But Politico just shifted the race to a toss-up in North Carolina. So there's many reasons for that. Obviously, I mean, that race is going to tighten up no matter what because there's going to be defined contrast drawn and things like that.
Yeah.
But what do you see kind of as the major issue in that campaign between? I think it's I know that there's other candidates in there. Holly Grange is running. I think she's filed, right?
She has filed. Yes.
So you have her running in the primary, but I think the eventual nominee is going to be Dan Forrest. Outside of anything unexpected or surprising happening, what do you think going to be the major issue in that governor's race? Because it's going to be a big race, and it's going to get a lot of attention nationally. Obviously, you're certainly going to have the presidential campaigns coming here. That could potentially hurt Cooper, in my opinion. We'll see. I don't know. I mean, that's just one prediction. It may not hurt him that much depending on who the nominee is, but if you get a nominee like Warren, it may not help him. But what do you kind of see as the big issue in that race?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So Roy Cooper put out a video today or yesterday that was saying that he had officially filed, and he was kind of running through his accomplishments during his time as governor. And he says the economy and jobs. And so you've seen him giving away corporate tax breaks, and maybe that's what he's talking about. But if he's talking about the booming economy, I think a lot of that could be attributed to tax cuts that he would have or did oppose at the federal and state level that he would be against. And then you have him saying he's fighting for teacher raises. I think that was a winning message for him until he vetoed the
let me ask you about. Let me get your opinion on that. I know maybe you're about to give it, so I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No,
but
you're fine.
I would like to hear your opinion on that because I kind of fished around on Twitter. I know Twitter doesn't represent everybody. I didn't look so much on Facebook. But it seemed from like people who might be supporting him, he was getting some backlash on that. And some of them were actually coming out and saying, I wish I got something rather than nothing.
Yeah, I think that's been the sentiment that I've heard too, just on the street and people I know that are teachers, and to some degree you could say teachers and other public servants like our first responders or prison workers, et cetera. In a perfect world, you would be able to pay them, whatever you wanted to. But in the world that we're in, there are budget limits, right? And so I think in that regard, something is better than nothing, especially when you look at the fact that now teachers likely aren't going to get anything until 2020.
Yeah, and they had gotten, I think, 6 consecutive raises. And so, from my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Republicans, they gave a little bit less to the teachers, saying we need to take care of state troopers and prison workers because they had kind of been neglected in some of the previous budgets. So they're trying to balance that out some and give a little bit more of a compensation boost to them. And, withholding at least some of that from teachers potentially. I mean, however you look at it. But they were getting essentially 4% over the next 2 years. And so you kind of seeing some of the backlash. I don't know if it'll get worse as time goes on or if it will just sort of foment. There's obviously going to always be a group and a conglomerate that are just going to be loyal to Cooper no matter what. I mean, that's their guy. But it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, and I think that Cooper's kind of in a tough spot because with his announcement video, which is on his Twitter if you want to go and take a look at it, he also touts his climate change plan, which did have to do with just the executive branch, which is under his control. So it's not very wide scope. And then he talks about his fight for things. So he says he vetoed Republican social bills, which I guess he's talking about the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Act. So he's in a tough spot where I think his party and his base are trying to pull him further to the left than he can go and win an election in North Carolina specifically. And so you see him using that kind of language, but in a very vague way. Because,
it is very vague.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I thought about the video. I mean, he talked about right-wing Republican social issues, but he didn't go to any details. Of course, it's very vague. He's always been kind of vague when he talks on a lot of issues because, I mean, ultimately, outside of the education stuff, there's not a lot of stuff that really supports him from a polling standpoint. He does well in the education stuff because I think people reflexively we need to spend more money, blah blah blah. And so he says we need to spend more money. We need to pay teachers more. I mean, just by and large, people aren't going to be against that.
Right.
You know, your average Joe out there, your average Catherine are not going to say, oh, no, we shouldn't pay teachers anymore. I mean, most people are going to understand that. And they're going to resonate with that.
Right.
And, you know, they're not dealing with some of the budget issues from a day-to-day standpoint as someone in the legislature. But it'll be interesting to see how all this shakes out with Cooper, because he could potentially be vulnerable. I mean, if you asked me 6 months ago, I would have said Cooper will win re-election easily. But I don't think I would say that. I would still say he's a favorite, but I wouldn't say that today, where he's just going to coast to a re-election.
Yeah, definitely. I think that people are going to remember with that Born Alive Act, because you are seeing at the national level, the left, and even with the Democratic primary for president, it's just moving so far left, and it's just out of touch with the average American, the average North Carolinian. And Cooper's in a tough spot of wanting to keep those people that are his traditional base, but also be able to win the middle that he's going to need to get to re-election.
Cooper won 10% of Trump voters in North Carolina in 2016. So if that number diminishes dramatically, and I expect it's obviously going to diminish some, I think, but if it diminishes dramatically, then he will be in a problem, obviously. And then if, let's say Trump's winning big, it's potentially that he could be polling real well. He may be able to come to North Carolina even more and help out somebody like Forrest and help, the Republican Party run up numbers here in North Carolina. All this is yet to remain to be seen, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. And that's a race that I think will be exciting, even though to me personally, politics aside, Cooper is not a very exciting person just from a personality standpoint. It'll be interesting to watch that race, because I think it'll be one of the more competitive, formidable governor races in the country.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think unlike Trump, I think you're right, could help whoever the Republican nominee for governor is. Trump has the benefit this time around of, I don't think the Democrats have anyone right now that looks like they can beat Trump to me in North Carolina. I don't know about
No, not North Carolina.
North
I think,
Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, even Biden, he polls around maybe 1 point behind, in a lot of these Civitas polls are 2 points behind Trump. Mm-hmm. But the others, I just have a hard time seeing them win in North Carolina. Like Warren seems like the perfect Durham candidate.
Yeah.
But, outside of Durham and Orange County and some of those places, I don't think she's going to have mass appeal. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, even Biden just doesn't look good on the campaign trail. I know things can change. Politics is so fleeting, and things can dramatically change. And, who knows? I mean, but I don't, ultimately from an electoral election standpoint, I don't think impeachment's going to hurt Trump any. I mean, it's only going to help him in some areas of the country, and I just don't see it hurting. And people have their mind made up about Trump, and I think people in the middle are, almost everybody's going to be like, I don't like Trump and some of his antics, but I think people are becoming more and more used to him being president.
I think so. And I think especially because you haven't seen the doomsday situation
right.
that, the day after the 2016 election, everyone
people were talking about stock markets plummeting. I mean, the stock market has hit record highs, over and over again throughout the summer and throughout much of the fall and into the winter. So, there hasn't been this doomsday stuff, even from a foreign policy perspective.
Right.
And
if people's wallets are doing good, then the incumbent is definitely going to benefit from that.
I agree. I mean, the economy, I wrote a little piece on our website about the economy being much more important from an election standpoint than impeachment. That's not really a big surprise, but, I think there's a lot of the national media is just so focused on impeachment. And I just don't think at the end it's going to play in a lot of people's votes. When they go to the polls in 2020, I don't think that it's gonna, unless something else is uncovered. I know the Democrats are potentially starting a whole nother fishing expedition on Trump. So if something else is uncovered, that could change. But I mean, it just, to me, and I try to look at these things objectively. I just don't. I see people seeing this as kind of a political charade.
I think so, and it's almost the boy that cried wolf at this point.
Right.
Even if the Democrats did uncover some kind of big finding against Trump. Is anyone even paying enough attention to be able to have that hurt him in a big way? It would have to be something very monumental, I think. But if they just find something small, people are going to say, well, you said that before and it wasn't true. It didn't pan out. We had the Mueller investigation and all that. So, I think that the impeachment stuff is going to just be political theater. And November 2020 is a long time from now.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to tell you about CLC. We got that coming up in Raleigh, April 17th, April 18th. go to our website, check it out, nccivitas.org. You can look up CLC. I don't know if there's any early bird tickets left, but I know that if there are, you can save $75 on those. And we're going to have our speakers. I think in the very near future, we're going to have some of those names released, and it's going to be exciting. There's going to be a lot of big names here, and it's going to be a fun time. So check out CLC. And obviously, if you haven't signed up for our newspaper, you can go to our website, nccivitas.org, and put your name in and your address, and you can get a free newspaper sent to you practically every month. So, Leah, it's been fun. Thank you for sitting in for Brooke. You did a great job, obviously. So we'll do this again sometime. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's been great.
See you soon. Bye.